Deep underneath the cobbled streets of Reithwin, the ruined floorboards of Moonhaven, and the cursed earth below the shadow-cursed lands, is a hidden fortress. Chiselled out of the underdark and hidden by its shadows is the Grymforge. The name isn't for the legendary forge alone, but the entire complex, stretching forth like a stone web. I'm going to be honest with you here, I have gone over the wider impact of the Grymforge on Reithwin in my Ruin of Reithwin video. The very first lore video I made on this channel, in fact. Instead of retreading the ground of that video, which I do worry about doing here, this isn't really going to be an explanation of exactly what happened within the fortress over the centuries. I will touch on key moments such as Ketheric Thorm's Dark Justiciars and Jurgir's raid on the Grymforge, which will be in the video after this one about the second era of the Grymforge. However, in this lore video I want to dive deep into how Shar and Dogma created the forge, Silouv Yali's conversion to Shar, and explore why his masterwork was abandoned. I'm calling this the first era of the Grymforge because this is when the Grymforge was at its zenith. The tale of Ketheric Thorm's revival of the Grymforge and the creation of the Gauntlet and his hordes of Dark Justiciars will be in the next video, which I'm going to call the Second Era. First Era and Second Era makes it tidier to refer to these specific periods as well, instead of having to word vomit Ketheric Thorm's Grymforge and Silouv Yali's Grymforge, which is just a mouthful. I encourage you to watch the Ruin of Reithwin video to get a full picture of the events surrounding the Grymforge during Ketheric's allegiance to Shar. Also, as a side note, I am recording this during the UK's insane heatwave, so you're going to see me reading from my script more often, and there's not going to be as much footage because I need to minimise the amount of time spent in the hottest room in my flat, which is where I record my videos. This is a deeper level of lore. This is the family reunion when you're finally told why it is that Uncle Martin hates Uncle Tim. This is the Reddit thread rabbit hole that consumes your attention for 3 entire days. Let's begin. The Grymforge was a stronghold for hundreds, if not thousands, of Sharans. Worship of Shar is usually a secret practice. Her endorsement of secrecy, deceit, subterfuge, and loss isn't conducive to living in any kind of hamlet, village, or town. If anyone were to find out about their neighbour's dedication to the Dark Lady, they'd be pretty much shunned from that point forth because, simply put, you can't trust them with anything. Every time they show an interest in your life, your relationships, your inner thoughts, it's almost guaranteed that they are going to turn it in some way to benefit Shar. Maybe by telling a secret of yours to the local blabbermouth. Maybe by sabotaging your business to cause you financial ruin and that upheaval pushing you to Shar. Or, the worst prospect, initiating some kind of loss in your life which causes you grief, which Shar herself promises to consign to oblivion. I invite you to imagine what it must have been like to have an underground complex, a stronghold town in the Underdark in effect, dedicated to Shar and bustling with her devotees. For an outsider, it would have been a constant threat. But for an insider, one of Shar's dark followers, it was nothing short of a miracle. For the first time, they could openly worship the Dark Dancer among hundreds of others instead of being confined to their tiny Sharan cells. They could openly show their adoration and devotion towards her, wear holy symbols and practice their religion without any fear of their neighbours finding out. All kinds of people from across all classes, species, towns, and alignments could be attracted to worship Shar. Even though Shar is a resolutely evil deity, make no mistake about it, you don't need to be evil yourself to find comfort in her teachings or to be lured into her embrace. In Faiths and Avatars, it's explained that people pray to Shar for reasons that aren't depicted in Baldur's Gate 3 at all. Miners pray to Shar for help working through the darkness of their mines, or a gravedigger working at night might ask her to keep dark terrors at bay. As the patron of loss in a metaphorical but also a literal sense, she's also prayed to by ordinary people who have just lost something. This isn't always a loved one or even something emotional. They might have misplaced a precious necklace and Shar could help them find it, sending some guidance their way via an epiphany or a sudden realization. In this way, Shar gradually tempts worship from lay people. It starts with help finding a lost book and could snowball into becoming a full-blown Sharan. These little pleas to Shar can pave the way to becoming a full dark follower. And to be clear, the blame here isn't on the person seeking help in the dark or finding something they lost. Shar is just manipulative like that. Way back in the era of Netheril, explored in the Winds of Netheril, Shar had a more disguised purpose. She presented herself, at least partially, as a healer. Grieving individuals could come to her for relief, as she promised to unburden them by freeing them of their grief through a sort of divine amnesia. Genuine effects could be discerned after seeking Shar's charity, although there were always ulterior motives. Through promising to rid the penitent of their grief, sometimes through amnesia, sometimes through counselling from her temple workers, Shar would cultivate in the penitent a numbness to emotional pain. To rid oneself of pain would be normalised for anyone who did it enough, and thus they'd be desensitised to the process of loss and giving themselves up to Shar. Whenever they experienced pain or grief, its severity would be mitigated knowing that they could go to Shar and have her remove it, and so over time they can become inured to the idea or the prospect of feeling any kind of pain, so again, they just become numb to it. Secrecy surrounded the true activities within Shar's temple in the Age of Netheril, so from the outside she was still seen as a healer of sorts. This dogma would persist throughout the centuries. Shar promises freedom from pain. This is a lie. In reality, she has her followers dwell on the very memories and feelings that they want to be expunged, to nurse their pain, fury, bitterness and spite, and to use those emotions to further Shar's agenda. Shar just loves overthinkers and those who ruminate. They are perfect fodder to fall into becoming devoted, dark followers. Their disposition means that Shar barely has to lift a finger to beckon them into her embrace. Only the most devout of her followers will truly be allowed to forget their pain. This promise perpetually dangles before every single devout. Strangely, the reverse applies as well. Those who know that their mental well-being has been harmed, desire to restore their memories, or want their calm state of mind restored should they have succumbed to madness, all are welcomed by Shar. Shadowheart is almost a mirror worshipper in that sense. Some part of her does want her memories back, but she also accepts that her memories have been taken for her to better serve Shar. Both feelings honour Shar despite their contradictory nature. When you fully understand Shar's nature, the mirror of loss and her holy symbol take on a whole new meaning. Her holy symbol is described in various sourcebooks as a black disc, but I think there's something deeper going on. Both the mirror of loss and her holy symbol resemble a scrying mirror. Scrying mirrors are black discs traditionally made out of polished obsidian. The scryer gazes just beyond the mirror and the reflective surface, careful not to focus on the mirror the same way you would an ordinary mirror. Getting that soft focus vision is the aim, where your eyes relax and your vision becomes less sharp. And in that soft focus, you are more equipped to receive messages from the other side, a higher being, a deity, whoever it is that you are trying to communicate via the scrying mirror. Or you may just experience revelations akin to meditation. I've always wanted a scrying mirror, I haven't got one, but they are a tool that's used fairly widely in the Witchcraft community. Scrying mirrors do, however, have different meanings to different people, cultures and practices, but broadly speaking, they are a tool for greater insight. They allow one to receive understanding from their subconscious, a higher power, or the beyond, and are associated with looking within, discerning the invisible, and communing with an unseen power. Shar's holy symbol, to me, is a scrying mirror. Devouts are asked to look on their reflection and commune with Shar by looking within and nursing their pain. Worship of Shar can be external through rituals and actions, but a significant amount of devotion has to be channeled within. Communing with Shar is often done silently, and she praises the same subtlety when it comes to communal rites. Unlike other religions, Shar is not and cannot be worshipped in the open in something like the Stormshore Tabernacle in Baldur's Gate. As I spoke about earlier, Shar's dogma encourages sharing secrets and spilling truth to manipulate others and bring them into the Night Singer's embrace. This is why, at first, Shadowheart is cagey about sharing her affiliation with Shar with Tav. It's a shortcut to being socially exiled because you literally cannot trust a Sharan. Not just with secrets, but also to abide by accepted social codes. Outside of the Grymforge and temples in Kalimshan, where Shar is worshipped openly, Sharans practice their devotions in secret. Cells of Sharans can be found in each region or cities depending on the amount of worshippers moving through its streets. A Dark Lady or a Dark Lord are responsible for each cell. There's no indication that there's a non-binary version of this title, so if you have a suggestion, please do drop it in the comments. I'm going to go with Dark One from now on. I'm also going to use the phrase Dark One to refer to the leadership of these cells. So, a Dark One would commune with a priest of the region, feeding them information as needed, while remaining ignorant about any other active cells. This is a deliberate choice. Because an individual likely never had access to more than one member of a cell before they are formally initiated into the worship cell, no recruiting effort puts the entire group at risk. In theory, that means that an undercover agent cannot gain access to a cell of Sharans and expose them to wider society. Though, where there's a will, there's a way. These Dark Ones each have their own secret. Someone's own secret is the sacred name that Shar gave the priest in exchange for a dark deed they performed in her name to prove their loyalty. This dark deed could be almost anything. It might be that you revealed to your sister's fiancé that she was cheating on her, or it could be something more insidious, like dismantling a local business in order to let a much bigger one come in and take its place. Own secrets foster an intimate bond with the Lady of Loss. As Shar gives these names herself, there is an element of making each individual feel special for sharing this moment with their goddess. In turn, the individual is primed for further contact from Shar, their own secret, acting like a password for genuine commands from the goddess. Sharan cells are kept secret by virtue of Shar's teachings and are low in number. The Church of Shar is small because they are driven to conduct holy wars against Selûnites. Selûnites are known for their kindness, charity and bravery and are supported by donations from all across society, and benefit from being able to openly worship the Moon Maiden. As a result, Selûnites almost always have a better equipped clergy, so those wars result in sizable losses on the Sharan side, and I will return to the reasoning behind that and why Shar might want that in just a bit. These cells are toxic. One of Shar's tenets is that her faithful are not meant to hope at all for anything at all. Hope for better weather tomorrow, a bonus from your work at the counting house, or that your partner will just like the cherry pie that you made. No hope whatsoever is allowed. Hand in hand is the fact that it's forbidden to try and improve your lot in life and to plan ahead, except for matters that are overseen by the Dark Lady's clergy. In effect, you aren't allowed to make your life your life. You are meant to be a passive presence, accepting that which happens to you. The only agency that true devotees are permitted are those endorsed by Shar's clergy. The void of agency here has one purpose. It fosters complete dependency on Shar's clergy and Shar herself. I do not know how one can deny oneself hope, because for me, this is kind of the nature of existence. By the time Ketheric Thorm has revived the Grymforge, this commandment is still in full force. On a tablet, the phrase "promise your soul and flesh, and seek no fortune nor favour" is engraved. Other rites would be bastardised over the centuries, but this core tenet is as immovable as the stone it's carved upon. Day-to-day life, as such, is a game of watching and waiting. Watching neighbours, rivals, passers-by, and the entire time waiting for commands from the Dark One who leads the small cell you worship within. That cell is your entire world, because the world outside the cell isn't one that you can fully participate in. Dark Ones, however, do have to make sure that lay worshippers are invested in remaining with Shar. They are instructed to fulfill the darkest desire of worshippers, to keep them loyal, and also to potentially attract new recruits. For example, one lay devout might wish for a public figure to perish. As a result, the public figure's family is thrown into grief, the pain of which could lead them to Shar. Or maybe a devout wants to see their childhood bully lose their job. The bully, being ignorant of who truly is to blame, which is kind of themselves but also kind of whoever wished them to lose their job, may blame their firing on their boss, and this bitterness could lead them to Shar to seek revenge. Shar does do things for her followers in short, but only through the actions of her faithful. Rarely does she ever personally intervene. But through all those explanations, I hope that I've shown that those who worship Shar aren't always evil ne'er-do-wells who lurk in the shadows. A lot of them don't start that way, although they might end that way. Consider what it must be like to be a loyal Sharan. You have to worship in secret in a tiny group of devotees without any understanding of what's going on outside your immediate Sharans. The only Sharan holy day is the Feast of the Moon. Known as the Rising of the Dark to Sharans, it's the last night between Uktar and Nightal. Different religions have different ceremonies to celebrate the same day, but of course followers of Shar have an especially dark way to celebrate. They undertake a live sacrifice and then plot their dark deeds for the following year. Of course, that's done in secret too. So, what must it be like to enter the Grymforge and to be able to worship the Night Singer openly? Intoxicating. Liberating. I'd imagine that although they didn't show it, hundreds of the initiates upon entering the Grymforge must have felt downright drunk with awe. Despite the life-changing effect it must have had on her followers and the considerable time, gold and effort it must have taken to establish the Grymforge, to Shar it was always temporary. This is because of Shar's greatest secret that only her most devoted followers know. Those who have risen to become a flame of darkness, a direct instrument of Shar. They know what Shar desires above all else, to return to the ancient calm of non-existence and emptiness at the start of time from whence she was born. This is what Shar is working towards, total annihilation and the end of existence. Tragically, she craves that which is almost impossible to reclaim, the nothingness of pre-existence. To me, this implies that Shar's evil nature comes from her deep grief that she can never return to her true home. Suddenly, it might make sense why Shar doesn't really care much about her small cells of worshippers, or why she orders her most devout, like Viconia or Shadowheart, to wipe out entire churches dedicated to her and start anew elsewhere. Shar wants to see the slate wiped clean, and in that cold, hard darkness, she can finally rest. And what might be worse than that is that she seems to actively resent her followers for being able to find some kind of community in worshipping her, which is just twisted. There's little to go on about the first era of the Grymforge. One thing we can be sure about is that it was created by and for Silouv Yali. Silouv Yali was a gnomish mage with considerable fame and following, spawning from the apparent miracles he conducted with his knowledge of metallurgy. Undoubtedly, this is what attracted attention from the Church of Shar. Sister Ansar is the devotee who convinced Silouv to embrace the Dark Lady, but how she managed this, I do not know. The record of this conversion indicates that Brother Silouv has been taught the true nature of our lives, that they are loss and nothing but loss. Through that sorrowful lesson, he has come to us into the Lady's loving embrace. Interpret this however you like. My own interpretation or headcanon is that Silouv suffered a terrible loss. A loved one, a pet perhaps, his entire family. Something serious enough to have him turn from his life of fame to Shar. Losing his entire family to me feels like the most likely chain of events, orchestrated by Sharans, I would wager. Getting him to abdicate his old life must have been a slow process. This is how I think it went. Sister Ansar would have become familiar with Silouv Yali. Through his fame and fans, she had ample opportunity to be concealed by a crowd as she grew familiar with his mannerisms, passions, and inventions. She orchestrated coincidental encounters with him, and he began to know her as a friendly neighbour. One day, Silouv ran into a quandary, a small one. Sister Ansar was coincidentally there to help. Maybe it was a patent that Ansar helped get through, or a lost shipment that was accidentally delivered to Ansar. Of course, nothing done was accidental, and these coincidences were carefully planned. Slowly, Ansar turned from Silouv's acquaintance to a friend. He confided his insecurities in her, and she was a supportive presence. Over the years, because I do think this took years, Silouv leaned on Ansar more and more. She may have appeared to be comforting him when he suffered setbacks, but really she was tacitly nursing his bitterness and pain. Maybe she discreetly reminded him of it when his emotions were otherwise buoyant, like saying something like a dead relative would have loved to see this when Silouv made a breakthrough. Not letting grudges or slights go, in the way that a friend does, just to make sure he doesn't get used as a doormat, of course. Then, when he suffered the ultimate loss, his family I think, in a tragic accident or something, Ansar would have gently alluded to a way to rid oneself of pain. Silouv, tormented by grief, was desperate for a reprieve. He would have had to beg for help for weeks or months before Ansar reluctantly acquiesced only after Silouv made a solemn promise that he wouldn't judge her for what she was about to say. As a close friend for so many years, how could he? And so, Silouv was introduced to Shar. I'm halfway through telling you about the first era of the Grymforge, so if you're enjoying it, please do like and subscribe to my little lore channel. I have plenty more videos about Baldur's Gate 3 coming out, and I also have a Patreon, so if you'd like to get early, ad-free access to episodes and bonus content, then go ahead and join that too, if you would be so kind. And now, back to poor Silouv Yali. All of that is firmly my own speculation, but it is grounded in what's been written of Sharon conversion methods in Lords of Darkness and other sourcebooks. Silouv likely fit into one of the key category of Shars. Quoted from the Champions of Ruin sourcebook, she prefers those who are strong enough to take care of themselves, but with a physical or psychological weakness that draws them to seek comfort from others. Maybe Silouv had an insecurity for Ansar to exploit, imposter syndrome to the extreme, or something like that. The idea that he never belonged in mage circles and they didn't appreciate his talent for metallurgy. That would provide a reason for why he took this skill to Shar. She, and her devotees, would finally be the ones to appreciate him. Silouv's command of metallurgy made him an invaluable asset for Shar. He had been experimenting before being turned to Shar with creating adamantine, an almost indestructible alloy of mithril and steel. Adamantine has to be forged as it doesn't occur naturally, and by many dwarves is considered an impossible feat. But somehow, Silouv mastered it. He's described as a mage in Baldur's Gate 3 sources, so perhaps his magical talents supplied the missing link which allowed him to forge adamantine. Silouv was recruited, and under his instruction, the Grymforge was built. Its city-like underground complex didn't go unnoticed. In Champions of Ruin, there's a throwaway paragraph which reads, "The Western Heartlands have seen quite a bit of Sharon activity of late, leading many to suspect that the Mistress of Night has big plans for the region. Rumours are spreading of a grand new temple being built in a secret location, although all efforts to find such a place have ended in failure. In truth, a strong priest has become a unifying force for the clergy in the region, backed by a clan of monks who are not affiliated with the Dark Moon sect. All the cells in the region have fallen under his sway." No more detail is given, and Champions of Ruin is from 2005, so there's almost no chance that this was always intended to refer to Silouv Yali. But, in hindsight, that's my headcanon, it just fits too perfectly. The Western Heartlands encompasses the area from the Stormhorn Mountains to the Sword Coast, and in my eyes, Silouv Yali is that strong priest, the grand new temple indeed being built in a secret location, the Underdark. He had scouted a location that had freely flowing magma and, crucially, veins of mithril ore. Mithril could be combined with steel to make the alloy adamantine, but to do so the magma would need to be harnessed. Silouv sketched out plans of pipes and valves to harness the power of the molten earth, as only that extreme heat could soften adamantine. Grymforge, a history, is a slim tome whose binding is thicker than its combined pages, but in those pages is a small sliver of information that clears up the timeline about when the Grymforge was built. The last lines of the history reads, "Just as Grymforge served our mistress 800 years nigh, so it would again. Here we will rebuild the lost city of Grymforge." The stronghold of Grymforge was built 800 years before Ketheric Thorn would unearth it again for his dark justiciars. Therefore, it was finished roughly around the year 590 DR. I doubt that the writer saying 800 years means that it's accurate down to the very year, so let's say it was built during the 6th century DR just to give some wiggle room. Even way back then, subterranean worship is typical of Shar worship. The Underdark comes hand in hand with secrecy and darkness, both her domains, as well as the Underdark, the reign of which she seized from Ibrandel. Beneath the surface, Silouv worked ferociously. In a scribbled note, which I'll expand upon in a later section, he's referred to as Brother Silouv. Dark Sister or Brother is a title given to fully trained Sharan clergy members. So, Silouv did undergo formal training to become a Sharan and wasn't just welcomed into the fold without initiation, or indoctrination is probably more accurate to say. Again, there's no official non-binary version of this title. Dark Sibling maybe, Dark Spawn. Over magma and mithril, Brother Silouv toiled, sketching out plans for a forge that could mould the adamantine he knew he could create. Eventually, his plans were put into motion and the forge itself was built, complete with hammer, anvil, moulds, piped magma, and a moving platform. Silouv spent almost all of his time, if not the entirety of it, in the forge. A desk above the forge still holds the remains of his research, a dusty forge construction log. Early parts of the tome explain the scientific and arcane principles behind the Great Forge's construction, but we don't get an insight into these. Silouv intended for his life works to be called the Great Forge, but as will become clear, the amount of toil it took to construct led others to call it the Grymforge. For Grym, it was. Inside the construction logs are Silouv's scrawls about his attempts to mould adamantine. He had chosen the site of the Grymforge carefully, as its proximity to both magma and mithril veins made it that Goldilocks location for his desires. These test runs of his are described in exhausting detail. We have access to only two. Hammer Test 2.5.66.8. The forge is functional, but operating at a scant 1/3 of its full potential. At current fractalization values, the hammer can force various iron alloys into moulds, but adamantine remains unmoved and unmarked, increasing levels of hypotorque to 6.94, doubling magma heat values. Hammer Test 2.6.70.0. Test unsuccessful. So hot was the magma that the adamantine shattered entirely under the force of the hammer. The properties of superheated adamantine are intriguing, but I seek to mould it, not crush it. Maintaining hypotorque levels, reducing magma heat values by 1/5. Silouv's numbering system is what reveals the most to me. Like with updates to your phone, the different versions are denoted by increasing numbers. 2.6 is newer than 2.5. The number following that second digit indicates the new tests where a variable has been changed. So, between 2.5.66.8 and 2.6.70.0, we can assume that Silouv has undergone at least 202 tests in between those two entries. Unless these tests are undertaken over a period of 2 days, but I'm getting into the weeds there. The point here is that this is what Silouv was like as a person. Meticulous and focused. And intimidating. A scribbled note found in the Grymforge writes that they never call Silouv's mysterious creation Grym within his hearing, presumably because it would send him into a rage. You can imagine how Dark Ones might come down heavy on those who displease Silouv, to mitigate against the risk that he should suddenly think better of serving Shar. This scribbled note is found on a skeleton, so whoever dared to put pen to paper about Silouv's short temper. This note is found on a skeleton, so whoever dared to put quill to paper about Silouv's short temper didn't live to regret it for long. This same note details that things were getting dire in the stronghold. Mithril veins were near depletion and there was a frantic search for more. Silouv required vast quantities for what the writer calls his most recent project. This mithril wasn't intended for the adamantine weapons and armour that Sister Ansar assumed that Silouv would make, the ones that the moulds were made for. It looks like he never made enough weapons and armour for masses of Dark followers. His attention had turned to another project far more ambitious, an adamantine golem. This golem would become known as Grym to the fortress's acolytes. It became a boogeyman of sorts, an object of fear. Why did Silouv change from forging weapons and armour to creating Grym? Its in-game description reads that this adamantine golem is an unstoppable juggernaut that exists only to follow their creator's orders, even if that creator has long since passed. Maybe Silouv planned for this golem to be used on the battlefield against Shar's enemies, as it is practically indestructible. The most efficient way to damage Grym is by rendering it superheated by magma, and on the surface, even with magical means, that's quite difficult. Whatever Silouv's reason, he redirected the finite supply of mithril to create Grym. I am certain that weapons were the initial aim of the forge, as a plaque near the forge observation area has an inscription that reads, "Forge your blade in the fires and raise it in the mistress's name." Grym isn't exactly a blade or something that can be raised, so clearly something changed along the way. And whatever was written on the plaque closest to the forge is long gone, the heat from the magma having smoothed it away completely. Maybe the inscription would have answered this question. Side note, the fact that there's an observation area makes me think that initiates and dark ones will regularly show Silouv's progress. How they managed to look at the adamantine Silouv had softened and not feel any hope for Shar's victory, I do not know. Any Sharon looking upon the might of Silouv's forge must have felt torn. This golem would be the forge's guardian. Silouv's insecure nature may have blossomed into paranoia. Now that he had built the forge and located the mithril, he could have grown worried that a rival would eliminate him and continue his research. But with the indestructible Grym, who obeyed Silouv alone, no one would be able to get near enough to the forge to test it. And so, Silouv's position was safe. Grym's design would become uncannily familiar once Tav encounters it. The armour of the Dark Justiciars of the second era of the Grymforge would closely resemble Grym. Their helms mirror Grym's own spiked halo, and much of the metalwork in the plate armour was also similar to Grym's chassis. The legend of the Sharon stronghold grew. Hundreds, maybe thousands of Sharons walked its halls. Shar was in the words spoken by her dark followers, the dark purple and black vestments they wore, the open nightfall worship. Shar was everywhere and out in the open. Sharons usually work in cells, so this must have felt strange. Looking upon the faces of fellow Sharons and knowing them must have felt wrong to those who had been serving her the longest. Mind you, Sharon ritual face markings do anonymise faces quite effectively, so it was probably hard to tell the Sharons wearing those markings apart. More of those ancient plaques can be found throughout the stronghold. One on the dock reads, "Come into her shadow, let all that is past be forgotten." Shar promises absolution and oblivion to those arriving by boat, perfect for those who have done wrong or want a new start. On the kitchen, a plaque reads, "Eat and drink freely, for the lady doth come." Shar associating herself with abundance and revelry, as if she is invested in her devotees' joy. She is not. And finally, the plaque to the dormitories reads, "Come all who are weary, sleep and forget." Forgetting being one of Shar's strongest creeds means that this might be the most sincere plaque in the entire stronghold. From this point hence, I don't know what happened in the fortress. Our information about this time is scant. Take the 4 things we know. Silouv Yali wasn't creating weapons anymore. He'd built an adamantine golem for the forge, that this golem obeys only his commands, and that mithril veins had been close to, or completely, depleted. I would struggle to see the upsides of any of those facts if I were a Dark One. Grym is active when Tav encounters it hundreds of years later. There are also legends of adventurers who have also triggered Grym, passed down by word of mouth. So Grym was a successful project and is hostile to intruders, aka anyone aside from Silouv Yali. I know all of that is obvious, but it's important to lay out the facts for this next bit. I think Silouv died, dissipated into paranoia, or was gotten rid of. Whoever took his place did not know that Grym only obeyed its creator's commands. When they tried to turn the magma valve and use the forge for the first time, Grym was let loose and rampaged across the stronghold. One of Grym's abilities is Awaken, the description of which reads, "Nearby activity rouses Grym, readying it to crush any who set eyes on its forge." Grym is possessive over its forge. Perhaps it was instructed to protect the forge from interference by Silouv. This would be insurance against his future, as I laid out earlier. Any attempts at forging, unless by his own hand, would have to first go through Grym. Interestingly, using a familiar or a mage hand to activate the magma valve prevents Grym from spawning. Is Grym unable to read the magical signature of these entities? I think so. The skeletons near the moulds, one of which carries the scribbled note from earlier, all make me think that the rampaging Grym theory is the most likely one. Dead bodies littered around the Grymforge indicate that there wasn't any cleanup afterwards. Grym may have crushed nearby dark followers while the others fled, and thus the stronghold was abandoned. But the legend remained. All of that is my speculation, but it makes sense. It would explain why no one knows why the stronghold was abandoned. Shar's devotees being devoted to secrecy means that there's no way they disclose such an embarrassing secret. No exterior force, like Selûnites, were responsible for the stronghold's destruction, so they couldn't spread tales of their victory against the Night Singer. Instead, the mystery remained, those who witnessed it bound to keep the goddess's humiliation secret. Moreover, considering Shar wants to return to non-existence at any cost, she wouldn't really care about her followers being destroyed. There will always be more Sharons. And because they operate in these isolated cells, the story of how the Sharons invited their own demise would never be passed along through word of mouth. Shar's Grymforge remained undisturbed for centuries. Tremors weakened the stone and piping, sending magma freely flowing around the forge area. Whispers of a dark city in the Underdark meandered throughout Faerûn. Should your Tav be a bard, they can recall a story about the mythical Grymforge. You recall the tale of a Sharon fortress armed with impenetrable adamantine, a metal created by a gnomish mage. There were also whispers of the gnome's secret project, an invincible guardian, though its existence was never proven. The few remaining weapons created by Silouv were passed down throughout generations, impressive beyond measure. Even after centuries, the blades remained sharp and armour unmarred. Deep in Menzoberranzan, 3 ambitious drow set their sights on finding the forge that created such marvels and seizing it for themselves. Timelines here are iffy. By the time the Selûnite Underdark outpost is established, the Drow mercenaries and Dawn are already petrified. I'm not entirely sure when this happened, well before Ketheric turned to Shar, I reckon, because the Selûna temple was raised by his Dark Justiciars, but the precise date, I can't be sure. These 3 Drow did not set out to find the Grymforge together. If they had, perhaps they would have been successful, and history, Drow history in particular, would be very different indeed. The trademark Lolth-sworn Drow cruelty, ambition and selfishness prevented this from ever coming to pass. Dawn, third-born son of House Batol and first-rank evoker at Graven Hollow's living library, enlisted mercenaries to protect him as he hunted for the Grymforge. When he found the forge, they would be rewarded with a cut of the treasure. His old friends, Filro and the Conqueror Zargrim, set out alone. Frenemies is a better way to describe the relationship these 3 men had. Each undertook meticulous research to find the adamantine forge, and each had been successful, to an extent. Dawn knew of the location of the forge, Zargrim knew the secret to its operation, and Filro knew of its guardian. Alone, they wouldn't have been able to master the forge. Together, they would have stood a chance. But these 3 were too arrogant to ever consider working together. To give him credit, Dawn was fairly close to the Grymforge when Zargrim appeared from the shadows, as the mercenaries would tell Tav over a century later. Zargrim had probably been tracking Dawn. The 2 broke out into an argument, which quickly turned into a screaming match, and when it reached a fever pitch, Zargrim summoned an enhanced spectator. It petrified the entire party, and Zargrim fled. Dev notes indicate that Zargrim had planned this ambush and that the strain of summoning a spectator is what killed him. Whatever ritual he undertook was beyond his ability and he perished. The Myconids, in their ineffable way, would choose to preserve his body in their sanctuary. Dawn would speak of Filro dismissively in the future, as when Tav tells him that Filro has gone mad and was killed in self-defense, Dawn replies, "Consider it mercy or pest control. Filro was never fully right." Filro had spent too long next to the Susa tree, and that, combined with his loneliness, had turned him mad. At the very least, he had found companionship with some hook horrors who had adopted him into their pack. And there in the Underdark, the 3 drow wizards would remain. 1 trapped, 1 mad, and 1 dead. Legend of the Grymforge had also made it to the Duergar. The tale of a crafty gnome helping to forge a fortress that would last an eon had tempted many of them to dream of discovering the forge for themselves. Some of their kin would eventually make it to the Grymforge under the service of the Cult of the Absolute. There's a deep tragedy in a gnome having created the Grymforge and in the future his own people being enslaved to excavate it. That is the history of the first era of the Grymforge. In the next video coming out on this channel, I'm going to explore the second era, which will examine the Dark Justiciars, the building of the Gauntlet, and how Shar communicates with her followers, specifically Ketheric and Shadowheart. If you'd enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you liked me going a bit deeper into the dogma and theory and background of Shar in this video, because if you did like it, then in future videos when I cover gods and goddesses and deities and whatnot, I'll try to include more context about the way they behave in Baldur's Gate 3. And as a reminder, I do have a Patreon, so if you want to go and support me over on there, I would really appreciate it. And now I'm going to go and peel myself off of this chair and take off this makeup, which feels like it's melting my skin because it's currently about 29 degrees in my lounge where I'm filming right now, and I don't have anything more to say. I'm so hot. I will see you folks next time.